Really excited to see so many of you here today. When we signed up for this, we were told it would be about 15 to 30 attendees, so this must be at least 60, so really excited to have you all here. And I'm Constance, and I'm not here up by myself. I've got my colleague Ruth. She's going to help me out, and she's going to talk a little bit about our services later on as well. So we're here today to shed a little bit of light on older victims of domestic abuse. And we're going to start with the most technically challenging part. So we're going to show you a little video just to give you a little bit of an idea what an older woman might go through.
See you, I'll call you back next week.
See you, Mum.
Bye.
Thank you, Granny, that was so yummy.
I watched that one.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
It was extraordinary.
You all right, Mum?
I'm fine.
What did Mummy tell you about that? So can you put it down now, please?
Hello.
Hi.
Here, I'll drink this. Sorry.
Or I will kick the thing in! Open it! Open the door, bitch! You're a liar! Liar! Now get upstairs. Go on, crawl upstairs. Go on, move it! Go on! Open the door, bitch!
Sorry.
Hello.
What did Mummy tell you about that? You all right, Mum?
I'm fine.
Did?
I watched that one.
It was extraordinary.
That was so yummy.
Thank you.
See you, I'll call you back next week.
Women's Aid, until women and children are safe.
Okay, just a little video to think about maybe what the barriers might be for this lady to come forward and seek help. There's quite a lot there, and we're going to talk, Ruth's going to help me out with this, we're going to talk quite a bit about the barriers to seeking support. Sorry, is this? I think I got confused. Yeah. So first of all, a little bit of research done nationally and internationally on older women. And when I say a little bit, that's what I mean, because there isn't a lot. There is an assumption that victims of domestic abuse tend to be younger women. And the Crime Survey for England and Wales, it confirms that by establishing that women between the age of 16 and 30 are most at risk. And that's also consistent with research done in other countries. And because of this, it follows that most of the research done to date has focused on those age groups. So there's very little available for older women or women past the age of 45, really. However, 1 in 5 women seeking help for domestic abuse has experienced this abuse for more than 10 years. So it's quite significant, and the abuse tends to be severe, it tends to be sustained, and tends to be having gone on for a long time in older victims. There's very little data available, so that's what we found when we researched and prepared for today. And the scope and the prevalence and also the experience of domestic abuse in people over the age of 60 is not fully captured, and that's here, and it's also across other countries. And not enough research is available. But here's something that is available, and it is done by our colleagues at Save Lives. So what we can see here, they've looked at the experience of domestic abuse of women over the age of 61 and those below 61. And the marked differences here, if I just explain to you, the top one is showing the adult family members who are abusers is markedly different to those of younger women. So 44% of victims over the age of 60, the perpetrator is an adult family member, as opposed to 6% of victims under the age of 60. Below that, we can see that 40% of older victims, the perpetrator is their current intimate partner, and that is lower, 28% of victims under the age of 60. So there's a quite marked differences in older victims. Also, down here on the left, we can see that older victims are much less likely to attempt to leave the violent partner or the perpetrator before accessing help. So in victims under the age of 60, 68% of victims attempt to leave the partner before they seek help, was only 27% in older victims. And again, the differences here is living with the perpetrator. 32% of older victims live with the perpetrator, and only 9% of younger victims live with the perpetrator. Okay, and then the bottom right half looks at disabilities and the likelihood of having additional vulnerability in their disabilities. So it's 48%, so it's nearly half of all older victims, and it's only 13% for victims under the age of 61. Okay, and looking at prevalence, and the experience, victims over the age of 61 experience abuse for twice as long as younger victims. So again, it's quite severe abuse, and they have experienced it for a long time, and there is a cumulative effect of this abuse, having sustained abuse over years. The Crime Service in England and Wales estimates that 7.4% of women aged 45 to 59 experience domestic abuse each year, and we're lacking those figures here for older women in the UK, but European research suggests that it's 28.1% in women aged 60 and over, so that's a very significant number. Karen Garler-Smith, she runs a project, Counting Dead Women. She has run this because nobody else has ever put together women killed by men in this country, and there were no statistics. So she started this a number of years back, and looking at commonalities and really statistics, she's found that women killed by men in 2013 and 2014 were aged 40 and above. So that's, again, is quite significant in this very high-risk abuse category. We talked about invisible victims early on. In fact, it's what we called our presentation. And again, I'm really excited to have you all here today because it's not something that's often talked about. There's very little research, and I have to hold my hands up. There are no specific projects in this area around domestic abuse and older women. So, but it's not just here. So nationwide, you probably recognize some of these pictures, some of the campaigns. The middle one is sort of quite a famous campaign that was based on this internet phenomenon of the dress in the blue and black and gold. This is all something that looks really familiar, but we very rarely see older women, and they're just never depicted in the media. So news stories feature around young women, media campaigns, so even of this sector, usually tend to revolve around younger women and domestic abuse. And it sort of reinforces in society really this sort of belief that domestic abuse doesn't really exist after a certain age. And also in academics, there's very little research done. Nobody's really focused on this particular issue. But what we do know is that older women's experience of domestic abuse is very different from that of younger age groups. And there isn't enough knowledge and research done around this. Okay, so this is another statistic from the Counting Dead Women project. And as we see here, the very highest risk category is the 36 to 45-year-olds, but risk goes down, and then it tends to go up again. So if you sort of put this together, this really high risk together with the fact that older women have experienced abuse often for a long time, it's actually quite significant. So a little bit about the perpetrators. We already sort of looked at the earlier slide and looked at the differences between older and younger women. So again, the Counting Dead Women project, the data shows that the women aged over 60 were killed by a male family member, either a spouse, a son, or a grandson. Perpetrators are much more likely to be a current partner, adult son or grandson of the victim. In younger women, it's far more common to have an ex-partner or former partner as a perpetrator, but here it's very likely to be someone in the family. So when we're supporting victims or when you're suspecting there might be abuse, it's always good to look at who is there and do some little bit of investigation around who is in the victim's life. Perpetrators also differ in that they might have vulnerabilities of their own. So they might be vulnerable, elderly themselves. If they're partners for sons and grandsons, there might be mental health, there might be drug and alcohol abuse. And again, this makes the whole issue of the abuse very, very complex because the family relationship, the additional vulnerabilities in the perpetrators. And often there is a reluctance of the victim to come forward because of this. The perpetrator might be a carer for the victim, which is quite common, but also the other way around. The victim might be a carer for the perpetrator. So again, there's the additional complexity around what will happen to him if I leave. And again, we already mentioned that perpetrators are 3.5 times more likely to live with a victim for women that are 60 and above. Oh, hang on. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about barriers now faced by victims, and I've got my colleague Ruth.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Okay, well, Constance has spoken about a lot of statistics around women and domestic abuse. For this next little bit, we'll talk about obviously women, but we're going to open it up to victims. So if we can just think, now this is rather a bigger group than usually I do something like this to, but so you've got to be vocal, okay? Think of yourself as an older person, as possibly a victim of what you've seen in the earlier video, and can we just brainstorm, just sling out anything? As I say, you will have to shout at the back because it is rather a bigger group than I imagined. We're looking at the barriers, okay? So
or we could use the microphone.
So any barriers, anything that comes to mind if you think you're an older person and you're a victim of domestic abuse. What are we looking at? Pride. Yep. Mental health. Yeah, hang on, one at a time, sorry. This lady here. Yes, so protecting other family members. The gentleman in the green shirt. Fear of homelessness, yeah. Anything else comes to mind? Isolation, yes. Certainly as you get older, most definitely.
Older people probably culture.
Yes, culture, beliefs, yeah, religion, all things that come under that category. Fear of not being believed, brilliant one. That ranges obviously the whole of domestic abuse, but yes, very much for older people who have been in relationships for maybe a long time and people perceive their relationship as being a particular way and actually it's not. So is anybody going to suddenly believe? Anything else? Thinking it's their fault, yeah. Yes. Yes, that's right. So if you're being looked after and that is the person that is actually abusing you physically, emotionally, and also financially, then there's very difficult to say actually, in fact, who do you tell? Brilliant, thank you very much for that. What we're doing, we've put it into 4 categories. So the first category that barriers face as older victims is the beliefs of us, people, stereotypes, all those things that come under this category. Normalisation. Older women may regard abusive behaviour as normal. Normalisation in this age group is very prevalent. So if they think that's how their marriage has been, either male or female, for 35 years, what's different? They don't know any different. If we look about society's beliefs, as it says up there, 1970, many women before that, it wasn't considered a crime. Marital rape was 1991, so therefore, you know, that in the perception of older people, they may not even consider that to be part of the abuse. Don't believe that services are for them. It happens to other women. The prevalence and also the media image, I think Constance mentioned that earlier, that it's younger women. I mean, if you do see lots of the videos and that, it is younger women that are experiencing domestic abuse. So we kind of forget that this ranges all age groups. And older women may feel more socially stigmatised and embarrassed. And I think somebody said that here, pride. How do you say after all those years, well, actually, I'm experiencing domestic abuse. I remember being at the One Stop Shop many, many years ago when I used to be in IDVA, and the oldest lady I've ever had come in was 84. She'd been experiencing domestic abuse for about 30 years. And the reason why she'd come in is, talk about the straw that broke the camel's back, he'd broken her best cup and saucer, and that was it. So clearly had an enormous amount of abuse, and when we unpicked it and worked with her, physical, mental, all of the domestic abuse she'd had, but it was that thing that just took her to the point that she was going to seek help. Okay, so the next barrier is family and finances. I know we mentioned a few of that in our brainstorming. There's insecurity. You know, if you're living in a place that you own, you know, you've got a regular income, and not necessarily you, but your partner has, and you're working, your financial security is tight, what's going to happen? People fear losing their home, losing everything. They may not wish to leave their home because they've been there a long while, it's their possessions, it's all they have, they're quite isolated, and therefore they don't know what to do with the pets. Loads of different things happen that make people realise that actually I'm in a stuck position. The money situation, financial abuse, is very much relevant in this age group. And if you are using a certain amount, if you've got capital, if you've got your retirement pensions, what happens to all that if suddenly you're then reporting somebody for abuse? Family pressures also, you know, as people get older, they seem to not want to obviously burden their children with it. If people have got older children that have seen them live a happy life, how do you tell your children that actually their father has been abusing for 30 years or 10 years or whatever? So that's another pressure. And the fear of isolation, which this gentleman said, you know, what do you do if you're very isolated? People generally get more isolated as they get older. If you're then losing the person that you live with, or like that lady said over there, somebody that cares for you, or do you think you'll be put into an old people's home, an elderly care facility? What is life going to look like? And it's all those fears that stop people from disclosing domestic abuse. The next one we're looking at is disability. Gentleman earlier talked about physical frailty and the complex needs around all that. You know, if you've got all the other things that stop women disclosing it, and then on top of that you are a person with a disability, the complex needs add to the what am I going to do with all this? Increased dependency on carers, on children, on just people kind of get into life and they have a certain people in their support network. If you're then going to report that person, where are you going to go with that? Women with disability has particularly difficulties in leaving relationships. That's not just from a physical thing, but that's from an emotional thing. And where are we now? The abuser may also be disabled or are dependent on the victim for care. So it's a two-way process there. And research suggests there's a strong association between physical abuse and perpetrators' needs to control their carer. So it's a two-way thing. And the final thing is service barriers. Limited understanding of domestic and sexual violence amongst professionals working with this age group. We all need to, learn on that case, and we're, doing work with older people. Professionals are less likely to accurately identify the signs of domestic abuse and the injuries, and I guess that's because of the fact that with older people there are maybe bruises from falls, and as the gentleman said earlier, the frailty of that person. Do we see the frailty because they're an older person, or do we see the bruises because they're a victim of domestic abuse? Something for us all to think about. Older women's experiences of domestic and sexual abuse are often overlooked and categorised as elder abuse, which can lead to women being referred to inappropriate services. And again, we reiterate the campaigns are targeted to younger victims. The lack of awareness of appropriate services amongst victims and professionals. So if we are always seeing that it's the younger women, then are we, as we get older, realising that actually older women are victims of domestic abuse? And the final thing is awareness raising using internet and social media. Social media, I'm terrible with social media, absolute nightmare. So therefore, anything on social media I miss. And this is what happens with victims that are older. If you're not on social media, internet, sexting, texting, all those things that I have to keep asking about, what do? And research has showed that for the older generation, put a sign up on a bus stop, put it in the GP surgery, in the shops, in places. Older people, I think, as I say, maybe I'm in the minority here, but we need to have other ways of accessing older people than thinking that they can all tap into their phone. I know some of you are really good, and I know some people that are 80 that are excellent, but let's go back to some of the older ways of marketing and so that we can actually get the point and the message out to older victims of domestic abuse.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So we looked at the barriers. Now, to identify the victims, a little bit around the signs to look out for. So, and Ruth has already touched on that. Injuries that are not fully explained, that don't seem to make sense, so there might need to be a little bit of digging to be done. A lack of financial independence, so your clients might present to you because they're seeking debt advice or something like that, and without somebody asking the question, well, why is it that you're in this situation, we might never find out that financial abuse is quite common, particularly that of grown-up family members like sons and grandsons, granddaughters. So there's lack of financial independence. A little choice in everyday matters such as the diet, clothes, lifestyle. So this is again for all of those that go into homes and see people in their home environment. They might be able to pick up on this. Withdrawn and subservient behaviour is observing how somebody is with their partner or their other family members. Then again, the isolation, no independent participation of social activities, but it's very difficult to pick up on. So this is some of the barriers. So if we think back to the video at the beginning, this lady, she lived in a really nice home. Everything seemed fine. Even the daughter and her family thought it was fine. So who could even pick up on this? So it's again those, but she probably does see a GP. She probably does, have support around health needs, and anyone who might go into the house might be able to pick up on this. Then there's a misuse of drugs, including prescription and/or alcohol, again, as a coping mechanism, is very common, and that's as common in older victims as it is in younger victims. To the right here, where we talked about the barriers to accessing support, and we looked for who's actually run campaigns for older women, I found something that I really, really liked, and it was done by Camden Council in 2015. And it was a series of posters, so where they put them up, I don't know, but I assume they went into those venues that Ruth mentioned. And there were actually 4 different scenarios. I've got 2 more on the next slide as well. So this is pretty much a sort of similar situation to the lady in the video. It's just, you think domestic violence doesn't happen to someone like me. I've covered it up for years, so it's her with the makeup and the perpetrator in the background. Here are 2 of the others. This one reads, "In the old days, he hit me, but I didn't tell anyone. Now he controls me by taking away my medicine. He says I'm lucky to have him." So again, this is a very common form of abuse, to actually using the control of medication, and particularly withholding essential care and medication as a form of abuse is very, very common in older victims. Again, here we see an older gentleman in the back and a young woman in the front, and it reads, "She takes my money, she says she needs it, I'm afraid to say no, but I don't know what to do." So again, this financial abuse, very, very common, and it also shows this dilemma of, she's, I don't know, it might be the daughter or the granddaughter, but he obviously loves her, and she says she needs it, and he has no idea where to turn to. So these are all common scenarios, and I thought it was an absolutely brilliant campaign, and I wish we could replicate something like this in Bromley. Okay, I've got a little case study for you, and I don't know if you can read it. I just wanted to give you 5 minutes to read it, and if you can't read it from there, we've got some printouts. So if you want to hold your hand up if you'd like a printout. I think we've got enough. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. If you let me know when you've finished reading, that would be great. This scenario is a very, very common scenario that we see in our services. So a woman who's put up with the abuse for many, many years, which usually started around the time they had children, then they feel like they want to stay in the relationship because it's better for the children. And again, a lot of the beliefs that Ruth talked about come into play, and they also feel like it's better for the children if they stay in the relationship. They tell themselves that, but he doesn't abuse the children, notwithstanding the fact that children are, in 90% of abuse cases, either in the same or in the next room. And we know from children in our services that even though the parents believe that they didn't witness the abuse, they do, they hear it, they know what's happening, even if they're behind a closed door, and it has a severe impact on them. But there's this belief it's better to stay with him, and he doesn't abuse the children. So women put up with it. By the time the children have left the house, they've suffered abuse for about 20 years, and then they might as well stick with it. So this is a very common scenario. It's also they might have established their lives, they have a nice house, and it's very, very complex. And what I really like about this case study is how she talks about the eroding of the confidence. So if you imagine somebody tells you over the course of a year or 2 years that you can't do anything, you're worthless, nobody wants you, and you need to look after the house, and really nobody would employ you anyway. But if you heard this for 20, 30 years, you really do believe it. So I wanted to show you this because it's a very common scenario that we see. We've also got another case study for you, which is a little bit longer, and it's a case from, it actually shows some very good partnership work, and there were a lot of agencies involved. Adult safeguarding was involved, the police was involved, we were involved. And we have printouts, and we will hand them out to you to take away and read. It's quite a different scenario. It's the abuses by an adult son. And there is quite severe abuse, but he's also the victim's only son that she still has. So in the end, she decides that she wants to allow him to stay in her home, but safety plans have been put in place, and a number of agencies are aware, so it's much easier for her to access support if she needs it again. So it's a recent case study, and maybe some of you even worked with this case in the room, so we will hand that out to you afterwards. But we wanted to also tell you a little bit about our services and what we do, and again, Ruth is going to help me out with this. Oh, hang on. I've got one more slide to go. So just a few recommendations. So the first one, it says, consider that there might be domestic abuse. So what I mean is that because it's so hidden and sometimes difficult to identify, just bear it in mind and just think, okay, are the financial difficulties actually down to something else? Are the bruises and injuries down to abuse? So just bear it in mind and consider that this might be the case. Listen to the victim's concerns, again, because the complexities around abuse by family members, the additional vulnerabilities around disabilities, just really listen, because the victim will have a lot of concerns. Consider the financial implications, consider disability and medical needs. Again, this partnership working is incredibly important around older victims. Consider the family members, because if we, again, think back to the first scenario, the granddaughter didn't know anything about the abuse, and she might be quite shocked, and she might not want her parents to separate at that point in their life, so they might not be as supportive as we think they should be. It might be that the victim is very concerned about the perpetrator's welfare, again, around disabilities, their care needs, or drug and alcohol, mental health needs. So looking at options for the perpetrator as well will probably go some way to eliminating those concerns that the victim might have. Familiarise yourself with services in the local area, again, partnership work, see what other services might be there that might help, again, the isolation. So that's really important. Be flexible around, where and how you provide support. Needs are different in older people, and respect the client's right to make informed choices. Like the case study I mentioned to you, which you will get, she decided she wanted the son in her house after all, which might not be what you would have wanted for her, but it's her choice, and she's got the right support to make that choice. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Ruth to talk a little bit about Bromley and Croydon Women's Aid Services.
Well, where can we fit in and help? We have refuges in the area. We've been in the area for over 40 years. And there's 7 in Bromley, isn't there? And 7 in Bromley and 1 in Croydon. So a lot of refuge spaces, although they are very used, they are busy. We do have a good turnover. A range of confidential, non-judgmental services to help meet the needs of those experiencing domestic abuse. Recently commissioned by the London Borough of Bromley to deliver violence against women services across the borough, which I think we go on to talk a bit more about later, and working in partnership with the Domestic Violence Intervention Project. We don't run that, we work in partnership, but it is a perpetrators programme, and it is for men who acknowledge that their relationship is abusive. There are leaflets on our table if you want to pick up that, but it's good to see that there is some help out there for the abuser. That's okay. Oh, you've got it, sorry. Okay, we have what we call the outreach service. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 different services within that. the Independent Domestic and Sexual Violence Advocates. They're new to us in June, and they provide support and advocacy for high-risk victims. If you're not sure whether your case is high risk, give us a ring and we will do the safer risk assessment. We have one specialist IDSPA for older victims, and she is located, it's Catherine. Some of you may have worked with her alongside of her. She is co-located. Some of the time she's in the adult early intervention team, and she's there to take cases of high risk and give advice. The other IDVA is co-located in the looked after care team, and she is the young person's IDVA. She works with younger people. And then we have a community IDVA, which will pick up community work and co-locate, hopefully in the police station for one day, or take police referrals. We also have a general outreach service, a community worker, telephone support, providing emotional support and practical information on services, and a young people service. This is new, funded by the Big Lottery. It's one, she provides support for young people between the ages of 13 and 20. She provides one-to-one outreach work. She also does group support, runs group work with small groups of young women, providing emotional practical support, but also looking at keeping themselves safe, texting, digital abuse, and a whole range of areas are in her course. She's also very much into prevention and has been working in the schools in a prevention strategy. What is good now that we have the IDVA for the young person, which deals with the high risk, and then we have the young people services. So clients can come in at one risk, and as you all know, risk is fluid. It goes up and down by the minute, hour, day, whatever. So if it comes in as a high risk, and then they do their crisis planning, she can then take the young people services up and do some other work. We have the one-stop shop. I don't know, hands up, who knows what the one-stop shop is? Just so that I know we're getting the word out. Okay, right, the one-stop shop. One-stop shop is just what it is. It's a drop-in for anyone, male and female victims of domestic abuse. BCWA run it on a Thursday afternoon, Community House, which is opposite the fire station, between 1:30 and 4. What a victim or survivor can do is go along and get support. There is housing, there is a representative from housing there is a representative from the police there is a solicitor there, and we are there. And they drop in and they can decide who they want to see. They don't have to see them all, they can decide. But if they do need some legal advice around orders or around anything to do with leaving partners, they will get free legal advice, which is an absolute godsend. So if you have any victims of domestic abuse, let them know the drop-in, no appointments necessary. When they're able to go, they can go along. As I say, Thursday, 1:30 to 4, Community House. We run support groups. We run 2 different types of support groups for adults. We do the Freedom, and we also do the Keys to Freedom. I won't go into the difference between them. If you refer in, and you want to know the difference, we can chat through to you which one is which. They are run term time only. There is a creche so that women can leave their children. It's a 12-week course, 2 hours a week, and it addresses domestic abuse, the impacts, the issues around it, cycle of change, all things like that. We also have just started to run a young person's group. It's piloted this 6 weeks for people between 16 and 25, and that's run by our young person's worker and our young person's IDVA. And that is about, it's not the same as the Freedom, however, it does pull on the Freedom's resources, but also looks more about keeping yourself safe in social media and things like that. So that's also available. And then we have the DVIP, which we work in partnership with the Domestic Violence Intervention Programme, and they run courses for perpetrators or men that have accepted that they are in an abusive relationship. And then I think that's okay. And then on top of, as I say, the refuge, the outreach services, we also have specialist support. We have Bridging the Borders, which is a new project aimed at improving support for marginalised women with no recourse to public funds, and European Economic Area nationals who are experiencing domestic violence. I don't know whether you wanted to say anything. Did you want to say anything more? Yeah, and we've got no recourse workers, and one of the things that they do as well is when somebody is leaving refuge, they will give, like for example, a no recourse lady has actually got a place, she's moving out of refuge, she will have support for up to 6 months afterwards. Even if she's out of the borough, it can be telephone support. We've spoken about the refuge support, 8 refuges across Bromley and Croydon. The Safe Bed Scheme, which it is what it says, a refuge space provision for women with no recourse to public funds, supported by the local authority, so they can be placed in a safe place, get lots of support, and it is an alternative to the other option of bed and breakfast, or B&B as we call it. Resettlement support assists refuge clients to move on safely to independent living. That's within the borough and outside of the borough. So we have refuge support for all our clients, and then we have the specialist no recourse to public funds and EEA. And then the final specialist report is me. My name's Ruth Buckland. I'm the Training and Awareness Officer. This is a new post. I do 2 roles. I train. There is training going on in the borough which I am delivering, foundation, intermediate and advanced. I also do training in schools, and I can tweak training programs to suit the needs of the person that approaches me. So if I'm prepared to come and train for, half hour up to 3 hours. Over 3 hours, it is not free, I'm afraid, but up to 3 hours. And it can be about domestic abuse, the impacts, the power and control wheel, coercive control, anything to do with that. And I also do awareness talks. So if you've got a group that you want to have an awareness talk to, I've done Samaritans, Rotary, any few people that need to know a little bit about domestic abuse or about what we do at Bromley and Croydon Women's Aid, then approach me. All of this, we have leaflets over on our table, so do come over and have a chat and take your leaflets. And please eat the sweets, because I don't want to take them home, and we don't need them in the office, do we? Okay.
Well, thank you very much to Ruth, and I'd like to thank you all for being here. It's really extraordinary numbers, and as Ruth was talking, I was thinking what we normally see is a room full of women, so I'm incredibly pleased to have all these men here today that we were able to talk to the issues of domestic abuse about. So thank you very much for being here. Just finally, our referrals, we keep it very, very simple, so you don't have to think about what service exactly. They mentioned something. Just call us. It's one number for everything, or an email address. So even if you'd like to talk through a case that you might have and find out how to support them, any advice or help you might need, or any referrals for your clients, or any inquiries for awareness raising and short training sessions. As Ruth mentioned, they're free, so up to 3 hours, so please make use of it. And thank you very much for having us today.